So this tutorial is going to be for the corner to corner granny stitch. Now this one is to show you how to make this particular stitch into a rectangular shape, because when you do it normally it is a square. So this, as I say, is just to show you how you would turn it into a rectangle. So say if you wanted to make a scarf or a bedspread or something like that, you would need to make it a rectangle instead of a square. So this is what I will show you in this video. What you do need to do first of all is follow my normal corner to corner granny square video, and I will link that in the description box, because you want to go and follow that tutorial up until you get to the point where your project is as wide as you want it to be. So obviously I'm only doing a very small sample piece, but if you were doing a scarf or something, you would probably want it to be maybe double the width that I've got here. So I've got 6 here. So you'd probably want maybe 10 or 12 squares across for a nice size scarf. But obviously you just make it as wide as you want it to be along this bottom edge, because as we start to turn this into a rectangle, it will go from one side. So this one edge we will continue to make longer, and this edge will always stay the same. So it won't grow this along this way, it will start to go off up there to make the rectangular shape. So as I say, you need to follow that video until you reach the point that I'm at here, where you want to start to turn it into the rectangle. So as wide as you want it to be. So I've just finished my final stitch here, and so I'm going to chain 3 as normal, and I'm going to start my decrease on this side here. So normally we would do our granny stitch in this space here, but we're not going to do that. We have chained 3 and we're going to move straight across into this very first gap between our sets of granny stitches. So into your very first space here, you will go straight into that space and do your 3 trebles. So skip across the whole of that first granny section and go straight into that space and do your 3 trebles. So 1, 2 and 3. And then you will work your way across as you have been doing as normal, just doing your granny stitch into each of the spaces. So if you want to just do that now, and I will meet you on your final square, but obviously mine's only a very small piece, so I'm just going to keep going for now. So I'm just on my last normal space between these grannies, so I'm going to do my granny stitch into that space as normal. So now we're on our very end, where we will do a normal stitch. Because we've decreased on this side, we want to make sure that we increase like we normally would on the opposite side. So on this end here, as normal, you want to do your granny stitch, so your 3 trebles, so you've got your granny stitch, and then as always you need to do that 4th treble into that end space. So again we're going to chain 3 and turn. Now because we've increased on this end a moment ago, you want to make sure that we increase on this same end again. You always want to increase on the same side and decrease on the same side. Otherwise you'll end up with very wonky edges and you'd have to start it again. So it's very easy to remember which side you're increasing on, because you will have the increase there from the row before. So as normal now, we're going to increase by doing our granny stitch into that space as normal. So your 3 trebles. And then you're going to continue working your way back along the row. So you're just going to do your granny stitches into each of the spaces along, and if you want to pause it now, and I will meet you as you get towards the other side of your work. So I've done my final granny stitch in between these final two grannies here, and you can see now I've, at the end of this row, I've just got that chain 3. So we're not going to work a granny stitch into that space, we are simply going to do 1 treble into that space. So where you have your chain 3 from that previous row, you will work a treble into there. So you haven't increased on this side, you have simply done your decrease. So you haven't done a granny stitch, you've just done that 1 treble. We're going to chain 3 again and turn, and so you can see now it's starting to square off this edge to turn it into the rectangle. So you've got your decreases here, which are obviously pulling the side up, whereas you've continued to increase on the opposite side, so that side is getting longer. So you've chained 3, so we want to decrease again on this same side, so we're going to skip across this first granny stitch and go straight into that first space, and we're going to do our normal granny stitch, so your 3 trebles. And again, you'll work your way all along doing your granny stitches, and then I will meet you once more as you get towards the other side of your work, where we will increase again. So I've done my final granny stitch in between those 2 grannies from the previous row, and now we need to increase on this end again because we're always increasing on the same side. So you're going to do your 3 trebles for your granny stitch, and then your final 4th treble as well. And so we've increased on that side again, so you can see it's starting to turn into a rectangle. So again, I'll do this one more time. You'll chain 3, and again we're increasing on this side, so you'll work into that very first, after that very first treble, and do your granny stitch. And then you'll continue to work the rest of the way along your row, and I will meet you at the other end again. So I'm back at the other side now. I've done my final granny stitch, and again this is the side that we are decreasing on, so we are only going to do 1 treble into that final space, so 1 treble. And so if you want to pause or rewind, but you're literally going to continue that until your project is as long as you want it to be. So obviously the width now is going to stay the same because you will be pulling it up by decreasing on the one side, but on the other side you will continue to increase, so you will end up with the rectangular shape. So the length now is obviously going to be along this long edge. So once your project is the length that you want it to be, we will then need to start decreasing on both sides to pull that corner up. So if you want to meet me again once you get to that point, and I will just show you once very quickly how to decrease on both sides to finish off. Okay, so I've reached obviously the length that I want just for my sample piece, so I'm going to finish now by decreasing on both sides to finish off this corner. So when you want to decrease on both sides, it's very simple. You chain 3 and turn, and so we're going to jump straight over into this first space between our granny stitches. So you're going to go straight across and do your normal granny stitch, and again you will just work all the way across. And once you get to the other end, you will just do 1 treble again into that final space. So we've decreased now on both sides, so we've got just 1 treble here, and obviously our chain 3 counts just as 1 treble up here. So you can see already it is starting to pull that across to finish off. So I'll show you that one more time. You will chain 3 and we're decreasing, so you want to go straight over to that first space between your granny stitches. And again, work all the way along. And obviously this is the nice bit now, because on each row you will have less stitches to do, so you always feel like you're onto a winner at this point. It's a good feeling. So again, I've got one last full granny stitch to do. And then again, instead of doing an increase, we're going to decrease by doing one treble into that final space. And so you'll continue to do that until your work comes to a point. So I will continue this now, and I will meet you when we come to do our very final stitches. So when you've only got one left to do, that is where I will meet you in a second. So in that last row that I did, I only had 2 sets of granny stitches, so I'm very near the end now. So I've done my chain 3, and then I've got 1 set of granny stitches to do. 2 and 3, and so then obviously I need to do my final decrease into that stitch, so just 1 treble, then go into chain 3 and turn, and to finish off you're simply going to slip stitch across into the other side of that granny stitch, so into that space you're going to slip stitch, so yarn over and pull through both, and you just do a little chain 1 and snip off. I've not actually brought my scissors in, which is really helpful. But that there now is your granny rectangle. So I really hope that the tutorial's been helpful for you, and if you need it, I do have a tutorial that I will link down below on how to add a nice neat border along, because your edges are straight but a little bobbly, if that makes sense. So it's just a nice way to finish off your project before adding whatever elaborate border you wanted to add. So that is it for the granny rectangle, and please remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you for another tutorial very, very soon.